Okay, here we are trying to do part 2 now. Here we go, part 2. So I'm going to basically continue where I left off, because, yeah. So, violence of the state against people and the social contract. Basically, social contract stands so long as the society is benefiting you and it's better than state of nature, where people will just beat your ass and take your stuff, then you're probably doing okay. Like, you should maintain it. But the moment that is, like, basically the state of nature again, or you're technically it's gonna like pun it, like it's gonna end you. You have a right to defend yourself, and so I'm just encouraging that, and militancy, and being proactive, and being armed, and prepared, and trained, and educated. The first thing everybody should always educate themselves with is with their rights, the laws that protect them, laws in general, as much as they're able, and history. History is great. And philosophy, because you understand the ethics behind a lot of these things and can maybe make more informed and intelligent decisions. We want critical thinkers, right? Not just people who follow rules because they were told to. So yeah, on that note, so violence, I want to highlight something else that was on here. Violence of the state actually has an extremely low threshold, especially right now. So, like, again, let's look at George Floyd. Didn't do anything wrong, really. Like, it was not a significantly egregious transgression that he was involved in, and yet he was killed for it. And the degree of violence, of course, outweighed that of the crime. The crime itself was not, like, it was far overblown compared to whatever crime might have occurred. So, with that in mind, yeah, I think that kind of illustrates, but there's like a bunch of them, like Freddie Gray, like you can name basically every person who's ever, like all the black people who have been killed by police officers, or majority of them, it was like often excessive force or abuse of force, and some of them got away with it, which is a damn shame, but our justice system, that's how it be, unfortunately, because it's not an equitable system, and it's getting more inequitable, so you should be worried and scared and afraid, and do something about it. So, that aside, just remember, violence of the state has a lower threshold. For a citizen to engage in violence against somebody who's a representative of the state, it has to be like, one, you have to have like basically absolute evidence, and then also you have to basically like maybe luck also, and you have to just be completely in the right for them. That's not always realistic or possible, but I mean, that's why you want to arm yourself with education and prepare yourself for as much as you can beforehand, and have the right kind of maybe values, and try and cultivate the mindset of compassion and solidarity. These are the things that will help us overcome and maybe convert some people who were maybe siding with the police over before to seeing the light. Unfortunately, I don't think that's likely, but it's worth a try. You try and extend the olive branch first before the arrows, you know. There was a system valuing things more than people. So of course you have all these people. I have a friend who does a podcast and a video series, Theodore, who does We the Unhoused, and I will try and put a link to that in my bio, or my little about part on this. But I've noticed in many of his videos that he highlights a lot of the issues that happen to people who are unhoused, and how the police are used against them as basically a tool to like push them away, and like this is an injustice in a different way than people think of because when capitalism kills people, it's not usually outright, or it's not as like flashy. So the kind of thing like people are told about with other systems of government or economic order, I'm not gonna say which ones because it's gonna be like, I don't want to be drama about this, but other systems of government and economic orders are glorified as being like, oh, they killed a whole bunch of people, or there's this big issue here, there. But like capitalism destroys the environment. Like there's all sorts of oil spills, and like we have a giant we were underprepared for a massive virus, and we're lucky it's not even the most lethal virus, but still like a problem, and it can kill people. It's killing people. There's 400,000 people who have the virus all around the world right now, at least last I checked. And so this is what capitalism does. It kind of like it's like the equivalent of like HIV, but legally, right? It infiltrates your system, and then it weakens the system, so it's vulnerable to like being co-opted and used for evil, and essentially becomes a self-destructive thing. So yeah, it's not great. Also, self-defense can be a very effective tool for achieving change. If people just we can take away the stat, like the titles and stuff of police officers, it would just have people in general and take it out of society. When people think you might fight back, whether especially think of bullies. When bullies think that they might actually get hurt back, they usually back down. That's why look at Donald Trump hiding in his fucking in the White House and bunkers and shit, and they built they built another little wall. I thought it was hilarious that the president is a one-trick pony and that he solves all his problems with the wall. So he's like, oh, immigrants, build a wall. Oh, protesters, build a wall. I wonder if he'll build a wall for our economic problems next. I would argue that some of the tariffs he's doing are building a sort of wall. But these walls don't really work. You need bridges, not walls, so people can walk across. Walls has become a prison. If you think about it, you become trapped in as much as they're outside, right? It becomes like siege warfare, and actually it works in the protesters' favor. So by all means, keep that motherfucker in. He needs to be behind bars one way or another, man. But that aside, I would argue people of color and black people especially, but we have to do this in a way that is we vet people, make sure that we address the issue of potential agent provocateurs, which are basically a fancy way of saying people who are trying to screw you over from within. We need to have what the Black Panthers were trying to do, essentially, or they somewhat succeeded until J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI decided to be racist and wipe them out. But that's a whole nother story. I'm actually really tired right now still, but I'm trying to push through because I want to finish this video. So, alright. So, this is going to end. The end point here is be militant, be armed, form militias. Form militias. People of color that have left-wing people of color especially, because you guys usually need the most. Because fascists are everywhere, and fascists usually get the support of the police, and neoliberals, fascists, they all team up, at least temporarily, until the fascists take power, then they basically screw over the neoliberals too. So that's slowly happening right now. That's why Joe Biden's and a lot of the Democrats who don't like Bernie Sanders and scared of Trump is that he makes it inconvenient for them also. It's not just the poor people anymore. But that's another video. So form militias. Because if you have a force that might fight back, they will think twice, possibly, before trying to fuck with you. And just, always be willing to fight back. Because demonstrating if they think they can push you over, or they think they can just, put you in a corner, they probably will. And then it makes you look weak, and then, yeah, it hurts the movement. So, I mean, if you're going to be armed and, ready to defend yourself, you have to be ready to, defend yourself. So don't take shit if it comes down to it. You have to be ready to, up to the point of, lethal harm, if necessary, to defend yourself from people who are trying to enact significant injustices against you, regardless of who they are. Alright, so yeah, form militias. Be armed first with education, secondly with tools for protection, and then third, form militias. And then you have to be kind of savvy in your communication. You have to understand that people might send people to infiltrate and be agent provocateurs and try and fuck up what you're doing. These things are not easily accounted for, but you just gotta do the work, unfortunately. It's just like anybody has to do anything to solve problems. Sometimes it's an evolving problem, so you have to keep, it's a moving target. Don't let up. And then also form mutual, and being militant, you also have to form mutual aid. And we had the benefit of having a little taste of that during the COVID lockdown, that people in small communities were able to form a support network to make sure that they have the resources they need. But we're gonna have to like beef up our ability to do that. So if you have the protection, we have to basically build society anew within the dysfunctional society, which is not going to be easy or probably even tolerated by the existing society very well, but it's possible and it's necessary. So yeah. Next would be so yeah. I'm going to touch on a Buddhist concept. It's called dependent arising, if I remember correctly. And essentially this is that things don't come into existence in and of themselves. They're usually come to existence as like a network of things. So like you have, a quick example would be like you have chemical compounds because you have molecules. You have molecules because you have, and it's not just one molecule that's doing it, it's a bunch of them together. So a lot of these things, like one action will lead to other actions. I know it sounds a little deterministic. I would argue that it's actually, I do feel like a lot of it's deterministic, but you could look at it as like branching pathways. And so there's so many scenarios that it will probably come out. And how can I put this? You can look at it from the protests, evolution of protests up to this point kind of thing. If you have not made progress using regular protests and you see that that's not working, and yet you are still being suffering within a system, then you have to achieve your ends by other means. And so you see how an unwillingness to compromise leads to a significant antagonism over time, and eventually probably a violent conflict. So it's this kind of concept that applies to pretty much everything in Buddhist philosophy, that your actions, karma, will lead to other actions. And so you want to be mindful and do your internal work to be a good person or be like balanced human being and see clearly about reality and not be like deluded as much so that you can make better actions that will lead to better results. There we go. So yeah, also, again, normal is not coming back, and we actually probably don't want normal to come back. So, like, significant, like, we can do better than normal. Let's put it that way. And we need to do better than normal. There's climate catastrophe. There's social economic catastrophe and economic catastrophe. There's racial and, like, other demographic related catastrophe. Falls under social, I guess. There's international conflict. So there's so many problems, and I think we're making it worse in almost every category I can think of. The United States is just doing the opposite of what they probably should be doing, and it's because we have a dysfunctional government run by selfish, evil, rich people, mostly. And they're peons. They're tools. They're neoliberal slaves. And remember, the norm wasn't great. Like, the norm was actually still killing people, and a lot of people were being... Oh yeah, that talked me back to something earlier, before I forget. The issue of how capitalism kills people. It usually kills people by deprivation rather than outright killing, although it does that too sometimes. Like, ask other countries we colonize, or like, ask the Middle East how about that, their oil. But yeah, usually it kills by deprivation. So like, as the gap between rich and poor grows, the poor become increasingly without resources, and they often are actually turn on each other rather than uniting to stop the people who are like increasing the gap in wealth, which is what they probably should have done. But I'm hoping this is something we learn over time, like soon. I'm hoping we learn soon to who the real problem is, and not be divided amongst each other about stuff that is pretty arbitrary. And we could have all the things if we just work together, or majority of them anyway. Also, if you're progressive, you now have a target on your back, especially under this president. And if he wins again, which is possible, unfortunately, very possible. And even if even if Biden, who's most likely opposition, wins, doesn't promise much of like the target being off your back. People are going to be like make it harder to be progressive and change. Like people who want to see significant reforms are going to be they're going to try to quiet you, even as the situation grows more and more dire, and I've seen this happen because I've been part of protests for many years now, actually, damn. And it's been all sorts of protests. It's been, whether it's like housing or the environment or clean water, I guess, or a sanctuary, or like sanctuary for immigrants or something, so they can be treated like human beings and not like there's some kind of criminal or enemy or alien. Who to trust? This is important. Always think about who you can trust, and also communicate over secure channels like Telegram, or like, I don't even want to recommend anything necessarily, but I would say look into ones that have end-to-end encryption, and check who owns those end-to-end encryption programs. I also suggest you consider going outside the box. I would suggest things like WeChat. WeChat it's not spied on by the United States government. So while China is probably spying on it, it could still be used for effective organizing, I think. So that's one thing to consider. What else is another thing? I'm a little bored here. Know who you're dealing with. So it's, again, goes back to education. Speak skillfully, truthfully, but do not volunteer information. They will always try to find something that they can take you down with. Progressives are going to have to face that probably increasingly as time goes on. What else? Volunteer. Oh yeah. I mean, other than don't volunteer information, do volunteer yourself for being of use to your community. This is how we defeat the selfish people, is by showing how strong collectivism can be. And so embody the kind of society, build a small society that within the dysfunctional one, so that it can eventually grow to the size to unite with other ones and override the dysfunctional one. Yeah. Then, organize militias and organize your community. Always, if you're going to do these things, anything where you're giving, you might engender, or like might represent power, always aim for the best possible transparency and accountability that you can offer. And people should do whatever is possible to make sure that this is the case, especially if we want to make a better, like, micro society until it blossoms into a bigger one. If we want to make a better society, period, transparency and accountability, which is increasingly a problem within our government. Our higher officials are getting, again, like, none of the scrutiny and punishment that would go to, like, a normal citizen or a black person, especially not a black person. So, let's see. Another thing is, another thing that is important is maintaining a balance of power. We want to make sure that power is distributed evenly and equitably and charitably, and maybe rotates, randomize, yeah, and just continue mutual aid beyond this virus, because the government shows no indication of being willing to really help people in the way that they need to be helped, and the help we're getting is like far below the threshold of what we really need. And I'm going to warn you now, like, the economy is probably going to get worse. A lot of things are already, as far as I'm aware, from what I'm reading from articles and like observing about the world, the United States has got a lot of problems that are going to be on the horizon that are beyond just this protest and beyond just this virus. And Lords help us if another thing comes along that's just as bad, or some other natural disaster we probably karmically deserve because we don't bother to prepare. We don't prepare for any of this stuff, and we give all our resources and money to people who don't deserve it and misuse it, and don't think about each other. So try to do better. Let's start doing better. That's the end point here. I'm gonna stop before 20 minutes officially this time. Thank you, and solidarity. Fight on, everybody. No matter what happens, be willing to sacrifice, because your sacrifice, if more people sacrifice a little bit, then a few people don't have to sacrifice everything. As things stand now, there are a lot of people sacrificing everything, and it's not going to reach the fullest benefit it could, or fullest positive impact it could. So let's try to fix that. Thank you. Peace out. This is Hey Wide Wall. It's my handle here. Hey Wide Wall.